السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Welcome to the second lesson, or the second lecture, second reading, however you want to call it, of the Revival of Knowledge course. Throughout this course, we cover the Book of Knowledge out of, or which is the first chapter of Ihya Ulumuddin, the Revival of Religious Sciences by Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya anhu. During the previous lecture, we have talked about the biography of Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah. We talked about some of his books. We talked about this particular book, Ihya Ulumuddin, which is considered a type of encyclopedia by Imam Al-Ghazali. And we mentioned how many chapters are there in this book. How many chapters in Ihya Ulumuddin? Is it 4 chapters? 4 quarters, okay? But the total chapters? Sections, yeah, 7 sections. But I'm talking about Ihya Ulumuddin. Ala said that Ihya Ulumuddin is divided into 4 quarters. Okay, exactly. There are 40 books or 40 chapters, okay? So each quarter has 10 chapters or 10 books, okay? And this particular book, which is the Book of Knowledge, the first book out of the 40, out of the total 40, is the first book in the quarter of worship. What were the 3 other quarters? There are 4 quarters of Ihya Ulumuddin. The first quarter talks about worship, and the second quarter talks about what? Habits, exactly. Norms, customs, routines. Okay. Third quarter talks about what? What does it discuss? Muhlikat. What's that in English? Or the yeah, we can help translate it. Distractive qualities, close. Okay. Mischief, yes. Bad deeds, sins. Okay. You said something? Dangerous? Well, kind of, yeah. And when you get things that would result into sins or bad deeds or things that would hinder the journey or the path of the person or the individual towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And then the 4th quarter, what does it talk about? Yeah, Savior. Well, Savior, that's okay. Salvation, is another. Okay. Salvation, or things that talk about repentance or rescue, so to speak. What gets you out of the muhlikat of the 3rd quarter? Okay, so these are the 4 quarters of Ihya Ulumuddin. And then we said that there are 40 books or 40 chapters. The terminology, the jargon that was used back then for a chapter or a unit is book. We mentioned something, or I mentioned something last time, and it was very brief. We said that the key for each quarter is what? The first book, exactly. So the first book of each quarter is the key for the rest, for the remaining 9 books. Okay. And we can say also that the Book of Knowledge is the key for the quarter of worship, and at the same time it's the key for the remaining 39 books, actually. So the Book of Knowledge is pretty much the foundation for the rest of Ihya Ulumuddin. So it's a key for that works for the quarter of worship, and it's a key for the remaining 39 books of the 4 quarters, or the totality of Ihya Ulumuddin. Okay, very well. Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu has divided the Book of Knowledge into 7 divisions, 7 sections, and let's take a look at these. It's on page 2. Page 1, I apologize. Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, book 1, the book of knowledge, or book 1 is from the translator. We need to revise the Arabic edition, but all in all, book 1, the book of knowledge comprising 7 sections. So it involves 7 sections. The book of knowledge comprises 7 sections. Number 1, on the value of knowledge, instruction, and learning. Now I want you to, we will analyze this table of contents, so to speak, of this book of knowledge, okay? So he talks on the value of knowledge, or the virtue, you could say, because in Arabic it's fadila, or fadlul ilm, or fadilatul ilm. So you can call it value, and you can also call it virtue. On the value of knowledge, instruction, and learning. And then he talks on the branches of knowledge, which are fardu ayn, mandatory, on every single individual. On the branches which are fardu kifaya, it's mandatory for the collective society, or for the Muslim society in a holistic manner, not for every single individual. On the definition of jurisprudence, fiqh, and theology, kalam or ilm al-kalam, as disciplines in the science of religion. So the second division, or the second section of the book of knowledge, he talks about the branches of religious sciences, or sciences of religion. Note that he's not calling it religious sciences, but he's calling it sciences of religion. And we will talk about this shortly, inshallah, or when we reach this point. And on the science of the hereafter and that of this world. So pretty much, section number 2 is a classification of knowledge. He is classifying disciplines, classifying sciences of religion. And then section number 3, he talks about what is popularly considered to be part of the science of religion, but is really not, including discussion on the nature of blameworthy knowledge. Then number 4, I'll go through them, and then we'll connect each section together. We'll, get them in some sort of a network. And then number 4, on the effects of debate and the reasons why people have engaged in dissension and disputation. Number 5, it talks on the properties of the teacher and the student, the qualities, the capacities, the skills, the traits, attributes of teachers and students. And then he talks on the deficiency of knowledge. In other words, he is talking about some of the things that knowledge entail. In other words, if a person becomes knowledgeable, there is responsibility that comes with it. So in this regard, knowledge becomes a risk, so to speak, huh? Because if you don't take the necessary responsibility of knowledge, if you don't carry out the tasks that knowledge entails, you become at risk or at danger of committing certain unethical behaviors. So pretty much the section number 6, he's talking about the ethics of knowledge, the drawbacks of the learned. We mentioned last time that Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu is very much concerned about the conscience, the human conscience, and how that the reader of Ihya Ulumuddin throughout the book always finds repeated reminders that to be aware of vanity, to be aware of being a hypocrite, being watching out for some of the traps of a shaitan. And then also talking about the scholars of the science of the hereafter from those of the science of this world. So pretty much he moves on also to add a classification of scientists or scholars or the learned men. And then number 7, he talks on reason, talks about the idea of al-aql, or reason, or intellect, its value, categories, and what has been said concerning al-aql in the traditions. If you guys recall, last time we said that Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu wanted to write a Sufi encyclopedia that would appeal to the jurists, al-fuqaha, and that would appeal to al-mutakallimin, the theologians. So how did he do that? He said, okay, I want them to be acquainted with this Sufi knowledge. I want them to be aware of the Sufi discourse. And of course, he will use some kind of Sufi rhetoric in the discussion. He's using certain Sufi terminology, even though Imam Al-Ghazali did an extraordinary job in Ihya Ulumuddin to write Sufism in a way, in a rhetoric that would be easy for a jurist, or that would be appealing for a jurist and a theologian to be engaged in the reading about Sufism. So he wanted to present Sufism in a way that would be appealing for the scholars. How did he do that? He used a rhetoric that is somewhat appealing to them, and also used a structure that is appealing to them. As we said, he divided the book into 4 quarters, and each quarter has 10 books. And this kind of division, the scholars of fiqh and the scholars of theology, they're very used to this kinds of division in their books, in their academic textbooks. And here I want you to note something, that Sufism in its origin and in its practice is not seen as an academic science. And the Sufis, they're very much aware and very much concerned about that individuals would not treat Sufism as a science, as a discipline, as an academic subject, but rather all these books are, in some sense, a way to standardize the Sufi discourse, put it in some kind of a structure that would go in parallel with other religious sciences. So you have the science of usul, science of fiqh, science of kalam, the other disciplines of language, the art of logic. All of these are academic sciences, they're academic disciplines. Sufism that is written down in books is not really a science of Sufism, but rather a way to be engaged in the academic reality that was there. But in its origin, Sufism is not an academic subject. It's a practice. And in its origin also is not really concerned about the process of putting theories or putting logical reasoning and syllogisms and proofs and things of that sort. See, there is some kind of an epistemological difference between fuqaha and al-mutakallimin and Sufis. See, all sciences, whether religious sciences or the sciences, empirical sciences, are really based on what? On reasoning that you kind of create some kind of analogy. You depend on causes to reach the effects. You hear a noise, so you kind of infer that there is some kind of being, some kind of cause that resulted in this noise, all right? So the idea is that we always use causes and effects. We use analogies. We use nazar, what is called nazar, logical reasoning. But in Sufism, this idea of using the mind, of using the intellect through analogies and syllogisms to get results is not really a method of ma'rifah, of knowledge. But rather this is a way to get engaged in some kind of academic environment. The way to get ma'rifah in Sufism is through experience, religious experience. Religiosity results in ma'rifah. Your practice of the religion, that your prayer and your fasting and your dhikr and your awrad they are means for acquiring ma'rifah. And this ma'rifah, they call it ma'rifah ghawqiyya, which is in Arabic, is related to the word taste. And for this reason, you find Sufis say that al-ibara, or the expression of the Sufis, is usually ambiguous, usually vague, because they're trying to verbalize personal experiences, personal knowledge that was acquired not by the means of the logical reasoning, but by personal direct experience, direct relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this has been noted in the Quran. When certain Jewish people asked the Prophet ﷺ, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, they're asking you about the soul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the response came as what? قُلُ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. That the soul is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say مِنْ خَلْقِ رَبِّي. He did not say that the soul is a creation of Allah. Right? But rather he said مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. In other words, that the soul belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا هُ. That nobody knows the soul except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also said in Al-Quran, أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ. He has the creation, and He has Al-Amr is an order, which is almost a direct order, which is expressed in Al-Quran as kun, right? Be. And the Sufis inferred out of these texts that there is alamul khalq, there is the world of the creations, and there is the world of divine order, so to speak, or command, divine command. And there is the world of the creation. What is that? How do we distinguish between the two? They're distinct, yet they're both connected. How do we distinguish between the two? Alamul khalq is based on causes. You would not be born unless your parents got married. And you would not be born unless their parents got married as well. Right? You would not drink water unless you seek water and you arrive to buy water, get water somewhere, and you drink. Right? So all the things in Alamul Khalq is related to causes and effects. When you're thirsty, you drink, the thirst goes away. When you're hungry, you eat, the hunger goes away. There's always a series and a ladder of causes and effects. And actually all the search of philosophers is to do what? Is to climb up that ladder. They study a certain effect, and then once they learn about it, and they learn about its cause, they move to that cause, they treat it as an effect, and then they go up one step at a time until they reach the first cause, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do they do that? They do this through reasoning. Because this is alamul khalq. It's based on causes and effects. And how do we come to know causes and effects? Through our senses. And how do we come about to know the relationships between these causes and effects? Through our intellect. But see, revelation to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes from a different epistemological route. The path to revelation is not some kind of induction or inference or some kind of logical reasoning and rationalization of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because some people make it appeal as if Prophet Muhammad ﷺ kept articulating and contemplating in the world until he came up with this kind of conclusion. That's not true. I see the idea of argument or proposition or syllogism or analogy and conclusion is not relevant to the idea of revelation. There is no proof and conclusion in revelation. There is no what is called in Arabic istintaj, that you seek a result. Okay? In the world of Alam al-Amr, divine command, if this is a correct translation of it, al-dalil, the proof, and al-madlul, the proven, they are both together at the same time. See, we use a proof in logic, we use a proof to get a conclusion. So the conclusion is kind of separated from the premise. You provide two premises and a conclusion in any kind of logical syllogism. Two premises and a conclusion. And you work out your mind and you think and you rationalize, does this conclusion follow from these two premises? This is how we think. And this is how we rationalize ideas. But in Sufism, there is in what is called shuhud or kashf, what becomes apparent from the angel, or what becomes obvious for the sage or the saint, is not a result of thinking and then finding out a conclusion. The proof or the premise and the conclusion, they go about together, which is called al-thubut wal-ithbat. So perception and the perception and conception of things and their existence, they go together. There is no separation between conceiving or perceiving things and then trying to work them out to find out another piece of knowledge. In shuhud or in kashf, they go together. Some of you might ask, how does that happen? I cannot express more than that. See? But they say in Sufism, maqam al-thubut and maqam al-ithbat, there is no separation between them. The separation between that when you hear some kind of a noise upstairs, so you infer that perhaps there's some kind of a person or individual or a group of people that moving around or fixing the furniture, or there's any kind of movement up there. How do you do that? There is a subtle separation between your inference and between what you perceived by your senses, right? So you perceive the noise, the sound, and then you think about it. This kind of separation is not present in the Sufi knowledge. Okay. So we come back again. I had to explain this to let you know what is Imam Al-Ghazali is really trying to do in this book. See, this kind of knowledge is not academic knowledge. It's personal, it's kind of individual, it's based on experience, it's about religiosity, not sciences, not disciplines, not academy, not logic, not rationalization. It's more of love, path, connection, relationships, practice. This is what it's all about. So he wants to get all of this, the result of these experiences, and he wants to put it in a form that appeals to those who are very much versed in this idea of academy, of this very idea of subjects and disciplines and sciences and rationalizations and debates and discourse and disputes and refutations and proving. See, they are in a certain realm that Imam Al-Ghazali wants to kind of attract them to Sufism. So one way is that he structures the book in a way that they would feel, familiar. They'll be familiar to them. This is one way. Another way, that he uses a rhetoric that is also understandable for them. Because the expressions of the Sufi sages would not, in reality, would not be 100% conceived or understood or tasted unless you get yourself indulged into some kind of similar practice of the same person who said the Sufi expression, and then you would find out. Then you would learn what he actually meant by their ambiguous and vague expressions. Okay? Another important issue we have to know, that Imam Al-Ghazali will start critiquing the theologians and will start critiquing the jurists. So he has two obstacles. One obstacle is taken care of. That is, how do I get these people to sit down and read a book on Sufism, perhaps without being Sufis, without being connected to a sheikh? How do I get the theologians and the jurists to sit down and make a case for Sufism, for the epistemological foundation of Sufism? Because these are results of personal practices and the understanding, the Sufi understanding of the words of the Prophet ﷺ is almost a result of the practice of these sayings. Not based on necessarily not based on the linguistic analysis and a work out of al-nusus of the texts, but rather it's a practice that results into enlightenment. So he got them to sit down and read the book by the structure and by a rhetoric that suits their understanding. But there's another obstacle, that he will start critiquing them throughout the book. We said that Imam Al-Ghazali is always giving reminders, he's appealing to the conscience, and this type of writing might irritate the reader. Especially those who are very much engaged into the vanity of academia. They get into debates and discussions, and they're very much appreciated, and they're very much celebrated individuals in the Muslim society. So how do I get them to read a book that involves constant critique of their method? How do I do that? The way he did this is to constantly remind them, whether directly or indirectly, about how well versed he is in philosophy, logic, jurisprudence, and theology. So you find him, for example, even in the 7th section of the Book of Knowledge, what does he talk about? On reason, al-aql. And he talks about the different understandings of what al-aql is. And he mixes, he weaves the philosophical views on what is the intellect, what is the human mind, what is the al-aql, what is reason, with the tradition, the Sufi tradition, and the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions and the pious predecessors, may Allah be pleased upon them all. So it's as if he's saying to them, look, I know what you guys talk about. I'm not a foreigner when it comes to theology, when it comes to fiqh. I understand where you guys come from. So when I'm critiquing, I'm not critiquing you guys because I'm ignorant of what you talk about, but rather I have the knowledge that you guys have, but I'm bringing something forward that you guys have not experienced before. Because if he does not do that, they might automatically reject what he's saying. Look, this guy doesn't know what we're talking about. How come you're critiquing us? And he would say, for example, the known quote, "Al-insanu adu ma yajhal." The human individual is an enemy of what he is ignorant about. Whatever you don't know, you might take it as an evil. So they might say, look, you don't know what we're talking about. That's why you're taking us as opponents. But he's saying, no. I am well versed in theology. I am well versed in logic. I am well versed in philosophy. I am well versed in fiqh. And I have ziyadatu ilm. I have additional source of knowledge, which is the Sufi knowledge. and I'm here coming to present it to you guys. You would find him, but it's not mentioned in this table of contents. On the first chapter that we're discussing today, or the first section, rather, which is on the value or virtue of knowledge, instruction and learning, there is a fourth part that he talks about in this section. The fourth part is what? The logical proofs or the rational reasoning of the virtue of knowledge. So he talks about the virtue of knowledge, or the value of knowledge, and then the virtue of learning, and the virtues of teaching, and then he talks through. He does that according to the tradition, according to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and of course before that the verses of the Quran with the explanation provided by the scholars of tafsir of his time and earlier. But after he does that, he provides logical proofs for the same views that he proposes from the Sufi tradition, but in a way that suits the logical reasoning or the juristic and theological reasoning. So throughout the book, every now and then, he reminds the reader that if you would like to have some kind of logical analogy, I can provide that. Okay? Imam Al-Ghazali, if you see the build-up, there is some kind of a build-up in this book. He starts with the virtue of knowledge and teaching and learning, which is universal. It applies to Sufism, and it applies to fiqh, it applies to theology, it applies to physics, it applies to chemistry. It doesn't contradict, or it's not limited or confined to a certain scope of knowledge, but rather it's universal. Because he is giving the first premise. I am a person who values knowledge as much as you do. And I believe in the same ethics and attributes and capacities that are supposed to be present in the learners and in the teachers as well. So we all agree on this part. But then he moves on to talk about what is fardu ayn, what is mandatory in every single individual, and what is fardu kifaya, what is mandatory on society. It's a collective responsibility. Fardu ayn is an individual responsibility. Fardu kifaya is a collective responsibility. Social responsibility. You know this capitalistic term, CSR, you know that? Corporate social responsibility. All right. You like this, huh? This is an FSR. It's a fiqh social responsibility. That was a lame joke about this, but okay. So you like this, huh? I know the Egyptian taste and the joke. You can figure it. So the idea is that he moves from talking about virtue to talking about ahkam, rulings. This suits whom? Suits the jurists. See, I apologize in what I will say now, but he's almost doing a persuasion, like lawmakers do, like salesmen do, right? Because any kind of presentation that requires that you're seeking, in his presentation of Sufism, he is seeking what? He is seeking the understanding and the comprehension of his presentation by the jurists, and he's seeking their acceptance as well. He's looking for them to buy into his argument. So he's kind of dragging them. In the beginning, he talks about something that is universal. It's a universal agreement. Nobody doubts the virtue of knowledge. And then, guess what? This is a book on religiosity, but we'll talk about rulings of it. So, imagine yourself as a jurist reading this. After you read this beginning part and you move to the rulings, you're very much intrigued. You're interested. What is he going to say? What is Fard Ayn and Fard Kifaya? What does our madhab say about this? So he gets them engaged into the discussion of his. And by a process of divisions and breakdowns and analysis, he brings them to the fact that there are sciences for this world and there are some kind of knowledge that takes you from this world to the hereafter. And once he does that claim, he talks about, look, there is a popular understanding and there is some kind of deep understanding, which is the third section. And once he does that, he goes for the kick. All that you guys do is debate, argue, who is correct and who is not, who is valid and who is invalid, who is right and who is wrong. Are you getting closer to Allah? See, in that same form, it's almost like that to the reader. Okay? See all the debates that you do. You guys talk about this and that, and you discuss this and that. And then all of a sudden, when he's asking these important questions, he directs the strongest question of his, which is, okay, very well. Debates, arguments. Is that getting you anywhere closer to God? So he mentions the defects of this. Once he does that, the reader becomes, at a point, he is questioning, all right, what is the root? Where is the problem? Where is the deficiency? It's as if the person, the reader then, the jurist or the theologian reading Imam Al-Ghazali will then ask himself a question. How did we get here? How did we get so involved in our debates and sects and groups and divisions? How did we get taken away? Imam Al-Ghazali can hit right on and say that there is scholars of Al-Akhirah and there are scholars of Al-Dunya, but that would be too much. So he diffuses that by talking about how to be a good learner and how to be a good teacher. So perhaps the problem is in education. And then after he talks about the qualities of good teachers, he immediately strikes after that. Look, there are scholars of Al-Dunya and there are scholars of Al-Akhirah. How does he present that to them? There are good teachers and bad teachers. Which is true. And you'd find jurists and theologians believing in this. They know that they had good teachers and they had bad teachers. So Imam Al-Ghazali, instead of directly saying there are scholars of Al-Dunya and there are scholars of Al-Akhirah, and instead of doing that immediately, he says, look, don't you believe that there are good students and bad students? Good teachers, qualified teachers, and incompetent teachers? After he proves that, all right, very well. There are scholars of this dunya, there are scholars of Al-Akhirah. If you buy this, you have to buy into that. If you agree here, you have to agree there. See? And once he does that, his argument here is forceful. He reminds them automatically at the 7th section. Let's talk about what aql is. I know what it is. See? So he ends on a strong note because, if they are cornered by his argument, if they are really pressured by what he's saying, they might start saying what? Look, you don't know what we're talking about. At the end of the 6th section, the jurist or the theologian reading this might challenge Imam Al-Ghazali. You know what? Okay, forget about all what you have said. You just don't know what theology is. You just don't know what the aql is. So he answers the question hidden in the hearts by saying, look, I know what aql is. And real aql is in tasawwuf. See? This is my own personal reflection on the table of contents, or the layout or the outline of the book of knowledge. Note something, that Imam Al-Ghazali is not saying let's forget about fiqh or let's forget about theology. But what he wants to say is, let fiqh be fiqh, theology be theology, and what takes you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be Sufism. Not because theology and fiqh have so much power in academia and has so much influence on the religious thought, on the understanding of what religion is, of providing a case for Islam, for example. This is something that we miss today. How many contemporary Muslim theologians do you guys know? Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, for example, says that one of the causes of violence amongst Muslims, one of the reasons is that they are, some of the youth, they are lacking a voice that provides a theological case for Islam. They find theologians incompetent, incapable of putting a strong argument against secularists or against atheists or against anybody who's refuting or doubting certain ideas or certain notions or beliefs in their religion. So they try to do what? If we don't have a verbal force, if we don't have a rhetoric that can defend Islam, so they seek violence to, they would assume that this would balance out the contention. So Imam Al-Ghazali is not saying, let's put theology aside, let's put fiqh aside. He's not saying that. He's saying theology and fiqh, they're extremely important. But you don't reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by theology and fiqh. And actually, if we put this in a contextualized, in a contemporary understanding, you'd find scholars from the West who are not Muslims, and they study religious disciplines. You might even find Christian theologians who study the books of Imam Al-Ghazali. William Lane Craig, for example, he wrote the Kalam Cosmological Argument. He wrote a book titled The Kalam Cosmological Argument. And he quotes and attributes the words of Imam Al-Ghazali, and he actually quotes Imam Al-Ghazali and attributes this argument to him when he's engaging into debates against atheists. So you have a Christian theologian quoting an ancient Muslim scholar, who's Imam Al-Ghazali, in a debate between Christianity and atheism. So the idea of theology or sciences, the belief in the religion does not, in practice, in contemporary practice, does not become a condition or a requisite for studying the books. Actually, you might find some non-Muslims who provide extensive studies in certain Muslim religious disciplines, and these studies are not equated, are not challenged by any kind of Muslim contribution. This is the reality that we live in. You might find, in certain aspects, you might find non-Muslims contributing to the Islamic tradition and Islamic religious sciences more than Muslims themselves. But does that get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Not necessarily. They're doing this out of research, out of academic curiosity, but not out of passion, not out of religiosity, not out of personal experiences with God. Okay? And this is the idea that Imam Al-Ghazali wants to distinguish. He wants to make sure, look, there is ma'rifah that gets you to al-akhirah, and there is a ma'rifah of religious sciences that could keep you in this world and would not take you anywhere closer to Allah. Okay? So what he's saying back then is very relevant today as well. And falling in this trap, what trap is it? The trap of, if we study fiqh, academic fiqh, we get closer to Allah. You find people then studying facts and books and treatises and manuals and textbooks, and they have extreme understanding, or at least they think so, and analysis of the linguistics and the different discussions and debates of al-madhahib and so on, but they lack practice. They lack the feeling, they lack the passion, they lack the personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that we witness today. So Imam Al-Ghazali was extremely intelligent in foreseeing this kind of problem, that people might be deceived, that because we study religious sciences, we automatically become religious. No, you can become an academic. This is what he's saying. You study religious sciences, you can become an academic, but that doesn't make you religious. And I guess after this layout I have given, you would now understand that there is a difference between a religious science or religious sciences and religiosity. In Arabic, ulum diniya, religious sciences, and religiosity, tadayyun. And tadayyun, throughout the history of Islam, has been the responsibility of the Sufi sages. They were the locals. Scholars were more of universities, schools like Al-Azhar and like Al-Zaytuna, and religious schools like Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya, and all the prestigious institutions, academic institutions. Scholars were there. This is where scholars would reside. But the activity of the Sufis was more local, was more based on a grassroots engagement with the localities, with the communities. So Sufism was more communal, not really involved with the general society, but rather more on these small communities and localities. So this is another way to distinguish between religiosity and religious sciences. For the remainder of this lesson, inshallah, we are going through a topic of, we will browse together the first section of the first book, which talks about the value of knowledge, instruction and learning, together with its evidence in tradition and from reason. We mentioned last time how we lack nowadays a discourse of virtues. We no longer hear the voice of virtues and values, but rather we hear the voice of benefits and utility. Because, and some people may say that this is a kind of a hasty judgment if I say that because of globalization, because of capitalism, because of the influence of the American culture, and part of the modern American culture is the pragmatic school of thought. William James, who was one of the fathers of modern psychology in the 19th century, wrote about pragmatism and how the pragmatic, and he provided a case or a defense or an argument for pragmatism. So the pragmatic view, the pragmatic engagement with the world, if it works, then it's good. If it provides the utility, the benefit, if it serves the purpose, then this is valuable. So value became very much connected and related to the idea of utility and idea of benefit. Not as something that is revealed by religious revelations. One might ask, what is the significance of this? There is a matter that philosophers and Sufis both believe in. That human beings don't know the quiddities or the realities of things. That al-aql la yudriku haqa'iq al-ashya'. The human reason does not come in direct understanding of the quiddities of things. The human reason revolves around descriptions, attributes, traits, qualities, but doesn't talk about the quiddity, al-mahiyya. Let's take, for example, something like love. What is love? All the studies about what love is not a discussion of the quiddity of love. Mahiyatul hubb. It's not about that. But rather about examples of love. About indications of love. About what love entails. About what love involves. About how strong or weak it is. How true or false it is. But what is love? Some people might say, it's the connection, blah, blah, blah. Well, connection is a result of love, not love. And then we can actually ask the same question. What is a connection? See? So al-aql does not really reach to the quiddity. This is something that has been stated by Al-Farabi, been stated by Ibn Sina, and there was an argument between Shaykh al-Kabir, Shaykh al-Kabir, Sadr al-Din al-Qawnawi, with Al-Muhaqqiq Nasir al-Din al-Tusi. And Nasir al-Din al-Tusi was praising the human intellect. And Sadr al-Din al-Qawnawi, the student of Shaykh al-Akbar, Sidi Muhyiddin al-Arabi radiallahu anhu, was defending the Sufi view. That all this is a discussion about terminologies and jargons and debates and all these, intellectual quarrels. They are all into the realm of qualities and traits and results and effects and conclusions and all these things. but not about the qualities. And when Nasiruddin al-Tusi was trying to defend this, Sidi Sadruddin al-Qawnawi, in one of his in a treatise that he wrote for al-Tusi, has quoted and has directed al-Tusi to read a certain part in Al-Isharat wal-Tanbihat, and it is also mentioned in the book Al-Ta'liqat by Ibn Sina, where al-Tusi is referred to it, and when he's supposed to read where Ibn Sina says the human mind, the human reason does not come in direct understanding of qualities or direct conception of qualities. And you see here how a Sufi sage like Sadruddin al-Qawnawi was more acquainted with the philosophy of Ibn Sina than al-Tusi himself. This has been mentioned in a book called Al-Murasalat by Sadruddin al-Qawnawi, Al-Murasalat, which is the letters going back and forth between Sadruddin al-Qawnawi and Nasiruddin al-Tusi. This book has been edited by a German Orientalist. Not an Arab, for example, Muslim scholar. And published by a German institute. So again, we're saying that the human reason does not come into understanding of qualities. So this is the first block, all right? So if this is the case, the human mind does not understand qualities and is only engaged in the realm of utility, benefit, attributes, qualities, connections, and so on. If this is the case, then if we build and if we establish all our beliefs and all our practices on the issue of utility, there will never be a cohesive religious standardization. You and I can disagree about the utility and the benefit of a glass cup, for example. You might say, well, glass is better than plastic. I might make the argument that perhaps a plastic cup is better than a glass cup, right? And each one of us might see a different view. You might look for this, that perhaps glass is less expensive than plastic in manufacturing. I might see the health implications of using glass rather than plastic. And then we get into the argument, which is more important, the economic value or the health value, right? And we keep going on and on and on in arguments, right? Let's take this example and move on to something like how marriage should be. What is lying and what is not? What is proper and what is not proper? How are people supposed to deal in transactions of commercial transactions? When we move to that realm, how are we going to judge, right? Either we put some kind of, we come into some kind of postulate and, or a consensus, popular consensus, that this is our constitution, this is our moral code, this is our ethical beliefs, and we establish our views based on that. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, the Lord who has created us, who knows the qualities of things, who knows the realities of things, dictates the principles and foundations upon which we base our moral conduct and behavior and practices. You now understand the difference between these two. Either we get our virtues based on some kind of popular consensus on certain moral understanding based on utilities and benefits and being pragmatic and being consequentialists, believing in some kind of a utilitarian view of the world. What gives us more utility would be the thing that we would adhere to. Or we say that we as humans, we can put that aside. We have a revealed revelation, we have a revealed message that came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in that message, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who knows qualities and we don't, dictates the measurement, the standards upon which a certain utility is ignored or a certain utility is valued. A certain utility is important and another utility that should be overlooked and not seen in a high regard. And you find in the discussions of jurists, you find them talking about al-maslaha al-mu'tabara, which is a benefit that is valued. And there is maslaha ghayru mu'tabara, or muhmala, ignored benefit or utility. That ash-shar', that the religious revelation sees that this kind of value or utility should not be valued. Okay? And because of our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He knows what we don't know, we adhere and we stick to that principle and that foundation. These are two premises. The first premise is what? We as human beings, we don't know the qualities. Okay? Premise two, if we don't know the qualities, then either we stick to some kind of popular consensus, or we seek the principles of our morals and our actions and our views of the world from the revelation that has been sent to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? If we choose the second track, the second path, then we are in need of a discourse of virtues. Because values became not equivalent to benefits and utilities. Values became what? Values became revealed understanding of the importance of certain aspects of this world. Knowledge became important in the Islamic view, not because knowledge necessarily has a certain benefit. This is true on some level, but in reality, because knowledge has been celebrated by the revelation of Islam. Knowledge has been highly regarded by the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the message of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? So we grasp the values of things from the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not from our personal experimentation with things. Therefore, we need a discourse that talks about virtues. Nowadays, all that we talk about is benefit, 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 utility, utility. This works, this doesn't, this is suitable, this is proper. But we no longer talk about the virtue of certain practices. I'll give you an example. Marriage. Jurists, and here you will see the importance of Ihya Ulumuddin. Jurists are kind of involved to a great extent with this idea of utility and benefit, because they put laws, and benefits sometimes are shared. And when benefits are shared, disagreements occur about how much should we share, right? So in this part, when jurists discuss marriage, they discuss it from the point of utility and benefit. Okay? But when Sufis discuss marriage, they discuss it on the point of fadila, because their concern is targeted towards ihsan, targeted towards virtue. Al-Faqih, the jurist, is very much concerned about the conditions of the contract, the benefits that each party would get out of this contract, how the benefits of each party is secured and guaranteed by the other party and by the conditions that are mentioned in the contract and so on. So what they say, نظر الفقيه, the concern of the jurist is towards the benefits and utilities. How can we maintain them? How can we guarantee them? How we can secure their continuation in society. Okay? So they're involved directly with the process, with the application and implementation of marriage. The Sufi is more involved in the fadila, or the virtue of marriage. Okay? So you find people now, when they talk about marriage, they always talk about the benefits of marriage. Why would a Muslim guy or a Muslim girl would need to get married? They say, see, the world is full of, problems. The modern culture, economic difficulties that are, that kind of handicapping and crippling couples from getting married early on. And then people start discussing early marriage, or should we delay the marriage? All the discussion is about how much do we need marriage? How much do we want marriage? How much do we desire marriage? What are we going to get out of marriage? How beneficial it is for you? How much you need it? How much it will solve problems in your life? How, if when you get married, you'll have some kind of a soulmate, and how does this bring tranquility in your life? And how you need to have a partner to carry on the responsibilities and difficulties and give you a hand in your journey throughout this life and so on. This is all that we talk about. So we focus on this idea of what benefit we get. But for example, we don't talk about how this idea of being couple, a man and a woman, a male and a female, is the natural creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't talk about that. We don't reflect on this. We don't reflect on the idea that this is the established nature of human existence. We don't ask ourselves what is the secret behind the fact that we're couples. We don't ask ourselves the question about why these couples, even though they're both from the same, they're both humans, but at the same time, one is a male, another is a female. We don't ask ourselves these questions. What is the virtue in that? What is the significance behind this? How marriage is, and this is actually a discourse of utility, but even that, and even the collective picture we don't discuss. How marriage becomes part of the human society. We don't discuss that. We even don't discuss the spiritual symbolism in marriage and spiritual resemblance in marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two types of attributes. Sifatul Jalal wa Sifatul Jamal. I will ask a question, I'm not claiming this. But is the the relationship between males and females, does it resemble the dynamics of Sifatul Jamal or Sifatul Jalal? The traits of beauty and the traits of Jalal. We could call it divine excellency. Would that work? Sovereignty. Yes, excellent. Excellent. Yes. So beauty and sovereignty. Traits of sovereignty and traits of beauty. Sifatul Jamal or Sifatul Jalal. And the Sufis, they say, each of these, they have their own madahib, representations in our life. So the question is, and both of them, they go together. There is some kind of dynamics between the representations of these traits or these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the world. Actually, that every single individual goes back and forth between the results of Sifatul Jamal and Sifatul Jalal, the creation of Sifatul Jamal and Sifatul Jalal. So does marriage kind of provides a symbolism, a resemblance of this kind of interaction or not? It's a question for us to think about. But for many guys, especially, this would be very boring. He wants to get married because he wants to have a girlfriend. Think about it. Many people, he wants to get married not because he believes in the institution of marriage, but he sees that non-Muslims, he is very much interested in the idea of a couple, a boyfriend and a girlfriend. And this is really problematic. Many guys, after they get married, they expect that marriage would go on like a boyfriend and a girlfriend. But then he or she, they are directly faced with responsibilities of a fiqh and responsibilities of Sufism as well. And the reaction then will be, this is not what we agreed on. You know, we agreed on that marriage is supposed to be fun. But fun does not go with responsibility, with duties, tasks, expectations, and certain mandated way of treatment, and so on. So when we lack a discourse of virtue, this is what happens. People start inventing benefits for themselves, for actions. So marriage is an institution that Islam calls for, and other religions calls for as well, and perhaps people who are non-believers would also believe in the institution of marriage because of, societal importance. But then what is the distinct separation between a Muslim who's getting married and a non-Muslim who's getting married? If we make marriage because of utility, then there is no difference. It's just different rulings and different should and should not, and a must and must not. They're just slight differences. It's like getting married in one country and another couple getting married in another country, where different laws and different rulings organize the institution of marriage. That's it. That's the absolute difference between a husband and wife who are Muslims and a husband and wife who are not Muslims. Different laws. But where is the Islamic virtue of marriage between the Muslim couples? Where is that? Now, do you understand this example of marriage? We come back to knowledge. In the contemporary world, the way we deal with knowledge is certificates, degrees. And I have to say an Egyptian joke. I apologize for the non-Egyptian. You know, they say in Egypt that the whole world, they use certificates to get a job, and they use love to get married. But in Egypt, we get married by degrees, and we get jobs by love. You ever heard of that before? So the idea is that knowledge became a utility for having a degree, for having a piece of paper to get a certain salary, carry out a certain lifestyle, and the major that you will be admitted to determines the social standards of your husband or wife, will determine the economic standard or class that you'll be involved in, will determine the lifestyle, will determine what kind of restaurants you'll eat at, you'll determine what kind of brands you'll wear. This is when knowledge became what? Became a utility. And we live in a world that sees the most important utility of all is the economic utility. Because capitalism is all over the place. People are branding themselves. Have you heard of any courses on that? How to brand yourself. So, branding is the theme. Marketing, selling, money, consumption. So knowledge becomes what? A consumption. You want to go and get a course to get a certificate, move on, take another course, get a certificate because I need a higher salary, I need a better job. Why do you need a better job? Because I need a better car, and a better apartment, and better food, and better clothing, and more traveling. So, what is the real intention of taking the course? Getting the car and the apartment and the food. This is why we seek knowledge. So everything becomes quantified in monetary terms. Everything becomes a part of an economic cycle. This is when knowledge is treated as a benefit or as a utility, not as a virtue, not as a quality, not as a capacity. Because when we deal with knowledge as a capacity, we start discussing rigorous education. We start discussing what is a beneficial education, what is the right educational system, what is an engaging educational system, how the dynamics between teachers and students are supposed to be. When we think of knowledge as a capacity, what kind of education that would result in development of skills, of understanding, of qualities. We don't think of that. So all in all, this is the role, this is the modern role of section 1 of the Book of Knowledge. This is the modern role. Because you might find, when people read the Ihya or read any other book, when they go through the beginning chapters where scholars talk about values, they go like, okay, yeah. Yes, knowledge is important because it is mentioned in the Quran and in the Hadith, and this is something that we have read all over the place. And every single one of you guys mentioned this in the beginning. Right? Of course, this has an educational role, by the way. Because Imam Zarnuji, for example, in Ta'lim al-Muta'allim says that علاج الكسل, the cure for laziness, is to go through the values and the virtues of what you're learning. So the book of knowledge, in the first section that talks about value of knowledge, has two utilities, two educational utilities. The first one is that it establishes a discourse of virtues. Number two, it lifts up the motivation of learners. It gets them enthusiastic about what they're going to learn and be involved in studying. So this is the role. So whenever you open a traditional book of Turath and you find فضل كذا, فضل العلم, فضل الصبر, فضل الفقه, فضل علم الحديث, Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi has wrote a book called شرف أصحاب الحديث, the nobility of the scholars of hadith. Why do we write such books? They do that to get the learners enthusiastic about what they're being engaged in. And here I ask you a question. When you go through modern textbooks, you find in the beginning an introduction to economics, introduction to physics, and they talk about how interesting physics is, how important, how relevant, how decisive, but they don't talk about the nobility or the value or virtue of the study of an economy, the study of the physical nature. They don't talk about that. Because again, these textbooks are based on a capitalistic understanding of knowledge and education. Not based on a worldview that sees or that believes in a creator for of the creation of the world. So if we were to write modern textbooks, if you guys move on to become educators, to become scholars, to become university professors, one important attribute, trait, quality of you as a professor, as a teacher, is to put in the beginning of your course reader, is to write up a summary on the value and virtue of the discipline you're teaching. This is what would distinguish a Muslim doctor from a non-Muslim doctor. You asked me about this question before. One of the things, I'm not saying this is the absolute distinction, but this is one of the things. Imam Al-Ghazali did not start by talking about the value of learning and teaching, or the virtue of learning and teaching, but he talked first about the value of knowledge itself. So in other words, he's talking about the value of knowledge as a quality or as a capacity. And then he would move on talking about the virtues of those who seek to acquire this quality and those who work on disseminating and delivering and helping and assisting others to acquire this quality as well. So he does not start with the process. He does not start with the activity of seeking or of transmitting this quality, but he talks about the quality in itself. And this would make it more universal and more holistic. Because when you say about the value of knowledge, this would mean the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, This would mean the knowledge of the angels, the knowledge of the prophets, the knowledge of the saints and sages, and then we move on to the knowledge of teachers and learners and so on. Okay, he starts this section by the verses from Al-Quran. And of course, I guess most of you are very much familiar with this method that we start from Al-Quran and then we move on to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and then we move on to the sayings of the companions and the sayings of the pious predecessors, and then we complement these traditions with rational and logical reasoning. Some modern groups, modern religious movements in the Muslim world, whenever you discuss a religious matter with them, the first question they ask you, what is the proof? Right? You know those guys? أين الدليل? And sometimes they say an equivalent question when they say, did the Prophet ﷺ say this? Right? They ask this is the first question they ask. When you do something, when you pray in a certain way, they ask you this question. Did the Prophet ﷺ do this? Well, there is a question that you should ask before that. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command this? Because in books of usul, they start, the way you lay out your hujjah in fiqh, your proof in fiqh, is that you seek a proof from Al-Quran. And some scholars of usul, they say you seek a proof from the consensus, al-ijma'. Because if it's a matter where there is a general consensus, then you should not dispute it right from the beginning. But put that aside. The normative way is that you seek, the normal way is that you seek a proof from Al-Quran, and then from a Sunnah, and then you have Al-Qiyas, and then you have the sayings of the companions, and then each madhab or each school of jurisprudence has its own process of reasoning in reaching a certain religious verdict or ruling. But they go directly to the Sunnah. They don't go to the Quran. And what is really ironic and contradicting, they're the same people who say that tawassul is not permissible. So when you see this, you just say, SubhanAllah. You say that we should not have they say so. They say that we should not have the Prophet ﷺ as a mediator between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. They say this in what? In spirituality. Yet in spirituality, Sufis say what? Sufis say we would not get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless we get closer to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Habibur Rahman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the Prophet. Loves Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we are loved by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then as a consequence we'll be loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in spirituality, they say we go to Allah directly and only. And the Muslim tradition is we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we also seek the help of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that. They don't. And when it comes to fiqh, the scholars say we start by Al-Quran. They say no, we go directly to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're opposite in each. So the start of the presentation of virtues in Islam should start with the indications or from the understanding of the verses of the Quran. He mentioned, may Allah be pleased with him, Imam Al-Ghazali, he mentioned several verses. We'll go through them quickly because we won't be reading word for word. But he started by saying the excellence of knowledge. He said that the evidence for the excellence of knowledge in the Quran is manifest in the words of God. And he quotes the holy verse, God bears witness that there is no God but He, and the angels and men endued with knowledge, established in righteousness. Ulul ilm. And then he says, see